Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today I will analyze the case of Bud Ackerman and Davis McClendon. First, I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. William Gray Ackerman was born on January 26, 1981, and lived in Greenwood, South Carolina. He went by the name Bud. He earned a bachelor's degree in business administration and made his living by owning an automotive repair shop. On February 25, 2012, Bud married a woman named Meredith Haney. The couple went on to have 3 children. By the time the couple was married for 10 years, Meredith was unhappy with Bud. She no longer wanted to be married to him, and the couple separated in the spring of 2022. Bud moved into his parents' house located on Old Abbeville Highway. In December 2022, about 6 months after the separation, Meredith started dating a man named Kenneth Davis McClendon. He went by his middle name Davis. He worked in marketing at a retirement community called Wesley Commons. Meredith and Davis realized that Meredith was still technically married. They did not advertise their relationship to anybody and would sneak away for romantic adventures. Over time, it appears as though they may have become more brazen. At the end of April 2023, Bud found out that Meredith was romantically involved with Davis. He asked her to discontinue the relationship until the divorce was final. The hearing to finalize the divorce was scheduled for the end of May 2023. Meredith and Davis decided to continue the relationship despite the request that Bud had made. Bud was not happy about the situation. He wanted to reconcile with Meredith and may have viewed Davis as an obstacle. Now moving to the timeline of the crime. On May 7, 2023, at about 1:30 a.m., a woman named Megan McGovern called 911 and reported a serious incident at the intersection of Avid Road and Sawgrass Place in Greenwood, South Carolina. When the police arrived at the scene, they found the body of 46-year-old Davis McClendon near the edge of Avid Road near a wooded area. He was on his back, he wasn't wearing a shirt, and he was only wearing one shoe. The shirt and the other shoe were found on the pavement. About 55 feet away from his body, there was a BMW 5 Series sedan, which belonged to Davis. It was parked on Avid Road facing Sawgrass Place and had severe damage to the fender. The police believed that Davis had been standing near the driver's side door of his BMW when a vehicle traveling in the other direction struck him and carried him down the road to where his body was found. On the pavement, there was a substantial amount of motor oil, which must have come from the vehicle that struck Davis. The police followed the trail of oil from the collision. It ended about a half-mile away at the house of Bud Ackerman's parents. Again, this is where Bud lived after his wife Meredith separated from him. When the police arrived there at 1:54 a.m., Bud appeared to be expecting them. His 2019 Ford F-250 pickup truck was parked in front of the house. There was a large dent in the hood and damage to the driver's side front tire and wheel well. On Bud's shorts, the police found blood. Later, tests revealed that it belonged to Davis. Bud Ackerman was arrested for murder, and the police continued to gather more evidence. Here is what they found during the course of their investigation. On May 6, 2023, the day before Davis died, Meredith spent the evening with Davis visiting various bars and restaurants in Greenwood. At some point, Bud found out about this and was not amused. He sent a text message to Meredith at 8:54 p.m., which read, "Why do you hate me? I just don't understand." At 10:40 p.m., Bud arrived at the Key West Club and confronted one of Meredith's friends. He was trying to find out where Meredith was. The friend tried to change the topic of conversation and called Meredith to warn her about Bud. Despite this, Bud continued to try to reach Meredith. He called her phone and sent her text messages. Eventually, he figured out that Meredith was with Davis at a restaurant called Break on the Lake. Bud drove his Ford F-250 to this restaurant, but the couple was already gone. As it turns out, they actually traveled to the Key West Club, where Bud had been earlier. Bud continued trying to make contact with Meredith. This behavior aggravated Davis. At 12:51 a.m., now on May 7, 2023, Davis called Bud. He arranged to meet with him at the intersection of Avid Road and Sawgrass Place. It's not exactly clear what the purpose of this meeting was supposed to be. It seemed kind of late to engage in any constructive dialogue, but maybe the men were simply going to talk about their differences. It's also possible that physical combat was the plan. Either way, Davis left the Key West Club and drove to the intersection. He called Meredith and told her where he was and what he was doing. At this point, Davis put Meredith on hold, but failed to come back on the line. Concerned, Meredith had her babysitter, Megan McGovern, drive her to the intersection. When Megan stepped out of the vehicle, she saw Davis on the edge of the road and called 911. The police extracted data from Bud's pickup truck and learned that the collision occurred at exactly 1:11 a.m., when the truck was traveling at 25 miles per hour. A surveillance camera mounted on a nearby house captured Bud's pickup truck driving by. As the truck moved out of frame, a sound consistent with a motor vehicle collision could be heard. Afterward, a man could be heard yelling something like, "What do you want to talk about now, blank?" The blank rhymes with the word ditch. Bud Ackerman went on trial in June 2012, but his attorney collapsed in court on 2 occasions. A mistrial was declared because the attorney could not continue due to health reasons. In September 2024, Bud went on trial for a second time. On October 5, Bud Ackerman was convicted of murder. He received a sentence of 45 years in prison. He is scheduled to be released in 2068, when he will be about 87 years old. Now moving to my analysis. Bud Ackerman maintains his innocence, and he has a few supporters. There is no doubt that his truck ran into and killed Davis McClendon. However, Bud claims that it was an accident. He said that he was driving too fast as he approached the intersection where Davis was parked. By the time he saw Davis standing in the middle of the road, it was too late. He turned the steering wheel sharply to the left to avoid Davis, which is why he ran into the BMW. The state, of course, disagrees. They argue that Bud hated Davis and wanted to see him dead. Bud deliberately slammed into Davis with the intent of killing him. This brings me to the question, was Bud Ackerman guilty of murder? Let's take a look at the evidence both for and against the idea that he was guilty, starting with the inculpatory factors. Leading up to the incident, Bud had an acrimonious relationship with Meredith. He wanted to reconcile with her and was jealous. Davis was getting in the way. On the night of the killing, Bud kept trying to contact Meredith as if he was trying to provoke a fight. Davis would not have agreed to meet with Bud if Bud had just left Meredith alone. Bud provoked this entire situation and essentially caused the meeting. Bud drove toward the intersection of Avid Road and Sawgrass Place to meet with Davis. He knew that Davis would be there. There was no reason to approach the intersection at a high speed. Davis was standing near the driver door of his BMW when Bud slammed his truck into him and into the BMW. After the impact, the truck turned a little bit to the right and continued down the road. Davis ended up 55 feet away from the BMW. A surveillance camera captured the sound of a man yelling after the collision. It sounded like the man was taunting Davis by saying, "What do you want to talk about now?" Bud was aware that he struck Davis, but he did not call 911. Instead, he turned his truck around and drove to his parents' house. Even after arriving at his parents' house, Bud still didn't call for help. Moving to the exculpatory factors, it's technically possible that Bud accidentally struck Davis. Maybe his intent the entire time was to ram the BMW, and he did not realize that Davis was standing next to it until it was too late. If Bud had an intent to kill, why did he strike the BMW? It would have been easier to kill Davis by simply running into him and not making contact with the car. Furthermore, hitting the BMW caused damage to Bud's pickup truck, which made it easier to identify him as the killer. That's pretty much it for exculpatory factors. When considering all the evidence in this case, do I believe that Bud Ackerman was guilty of murder? Yes, he was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. What do I think happened in this case? This is just a theory, my opinion. Bud and Meredith were married for over 10 years. According to Meredith, Bud became depressed and started drinking. Eventually, he became frightening and paranoid. She indicated that he placed hidden cameras in a pillow, a bush, a dresser, and in the children's bedrooms. Once Meredith left Bud, he discontinued his alcohol use. It seemed like he was trying to change his ways, but Meredith had already made up her mind about the relationship. She did not want to be with Bud anymore. Bud did not understand the damage he caused to the marriage by his drinking and other worrisome behavior. From his perspective, if he made some positive changes, then everything should be good. Meredith should have reconciled with him. End of story. They could live happily ever after. The problem is that Bud had a distorted view of his own destructive behavior. He did not appreciate what Meredith had witnessed and did not understand her feelings. Bud had caused more damage than he thought. He interpreted Meredith's refusal to reconcile as her hating him. This was his effort to make her the bad guy in the story. Bud was playing the victim. Meredith made it clear that reconciliation was never going to happen, but Bud would not respect her decision. He kept trying to win her back. In late April 2023, when Bud learned about the romance between Meredith and Davis, he knew this was a bad sign. Combining this revelation with the hearing scheduled for the end of May to finalize the divorce, Bud was feeling despondent. He knew that the end was approaching quickly. Bud became increasingly desperate and was willing to take drastic steps to reconcile. He had requested that Meredith and Davis halt their romance until the divorce was finalized. He didn't really care about the implications of them being together prior to the divorce. This was just a tactic to get Davis away from Meredith. If the divorce had already been finalized, Bud would have just developed another excuse for the couple to be apart. Meredith and Davis could have waited. They could have attempted to appease Bud, but Davis viewed Bud's behavior as controlling. He did not want to give in to Bud's wishes. Bud latched onto this refusal as moral justification to harass Meredith. After finding out that she and Davis were spending the night out, Bud repeatedly tried to get in contact with Meredith. Eventually, Davis became so aggravated by Bud's incessant behavior, he scheduled a meeting with him. Based on how Davis was found with his shirt off, he was probably planning on a physical confrontation. Maybe the men had agreed to fight. There's no way to know at this point. One thing was for certain, nothing good was going to come of these two men meeting at a dark intersection after 1 a.m. It was more likely to be a crime scene than a venue for a brilliant diplomatic solution. Any alcohol they may have consumed that night only increased the risk that something would go terribly wrong. Davis had greatly underestimated his adversary. Just like Bud did not understand Meredith's feelings, Davis did not understand Bud's feelings. He did not realize how jealous and dangerous Bud was. As Bud drove up to the intersection, he saw Davis standing there with his shirt off, ready for a physical confrontation. In Bud's way of thinking, Davis had made a critical mistake as far as preparing for combat. He brought his fists to a vehicle fight. Davis was prepared to be the star of his own action movie. He was thinking something like Rocky. Bud was more on board with Mad Max. Bud wanted to ensure that this was the last mistake Davis would ever make, and he slammed into him with a 6,700-pound pickup truck. One lesson that can be learned from this case is to exercise caution when becoming involved in someone else's broken romantic relationship. A person can become very invested in a romantic partner, especially if they have been together for a long time and they have children together. Those relationships can have a lot of complex and intense feelings associated with them. Many of the feelings are negative and destructive. Davis would have been better off simply avoiding Bud and dealing with any potential confrontations by contacting law enforcement. Instead, he planned on teaching Bud a lesson in a fistfight. This was only inviting trouble. Davis walked right into Bud's crosshairs and gave him exactly the opportunity he so desperately wanted. Bud had transformed Davis into some kind of demon. In his mind, Davis was now the reason that Bud could not reconcile with Meredith. Bud now had someone to blame for all his anger, resentment, and despair. If he could kill the demon, maybe those feelings would go away. Based on this flawed thinking, Bud directed all his rage and his pickup truck toward his enemy. What followed was a collision of unchecked emotions, bad decisions, and the dangerous belief that violence is always the answer. Those are my thoughts on the case of Bud Ackerman and Davis McClendon. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you soon.